welcome to Kilroy Was Here, a series of reviews focused on movies about or set in the time of World War II. Our goal? To dig a little bit deeper and not just give you a review of the movie, but also give you a sense of what the movie meant in the time that it was made and how that movie's time shapes our perception today about the events of this great conflict. I'm Matt Bromond, I'm your host, and this is a project of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, a legal services foundation devoted to providing help for veterans and military service members. If you want to support Kilroy Was Here or the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and go visit our website. We've got some neat things there and an ongoing conversation about how these events have shaped our todays and tomorrows. But let's get started. We've got a lot of history to talk about. And, hopefully, some good movies too. So come along with me, will you? Because Kilroy was there. Our first episode is going to focus on my absolutely favorite movie of all time, Casablanca. By Warner Brothers from 1943. This movie is, for many people, the best movie ever made. I'm one of those people. It's also a movie inextricably bound up with the events of World War II. Made during many of the darkest days of World War II. It's Casablanca, starring Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henreid. We're going to dig into the most important summer vacation ever. Because in the summer of 1940, Murray Burnett wrote the play Everybody Comes to Rick's. And when he did that, he set in motion a chain of events that would deliver to us, the movie-going public, one of the greatest movies of all time and the best movie I can imagine to use to start this series. The story of Casablanca begins in the summer of 1938. Murray Burnett, an English teacher in the United States with relatives who were Jewish in Vienna, Austria, decides that he needs to help them get some of their money out of the country since the Nazis had recently annexed Austria into the German Reich. So he and his wife Frances went to Vienna and worked with their relatives to help get some of their money out of Europe. Then they stopped briefly in a Mediterranean village in France where they heard a black piano player performing for Nazis, refugees, and French people. And Murray decided that this was an amazing setting for a fantastic story that he wanted to tell. He then took a few weeks in England before returning to the United States to finish polishing off the main elements of the plot. But as life and the course of war and world events would have happen, he wasn't able to return to the story until the summer of 1940. Over 6 weeks of that summer, he finished writing the play, and he immediately went off to New York to see if he could option it out to Broadway. He was unsuccessful there, but he did win an unprecedented $20,000 for Warner Brothers to take the rights to this unproduced play. That play then was given script polishing by a couple of Warner Brothers stalwarts, and many of the amazing dialogue scenes that we all love so well from the movie are the result of the Epstein brothers doing their work, or the Koch contribution in replotting some of the elements. But one of the most important elements of the film actually comes from the play. The song everybody associates with the movie Casablanca, as time goes by, was Murray Burnett's favorite song when he was a student at Cornell in the early 30s. And so, in the play, As Time Goes By, is the song that Sam plays. Now, when the movie was put together, there was a very famous Hollywood composer who wrote a very terrific Hollywood score for the movie. It's absolutely terrific music, and we all thrill to all of the musical notes that are put in there. But the plan was to replace As Time Goes By with an original composition. That original composition, gratefully, didn't get into the film because it hadn't been recorded by Dooley Wilson, the singer who does As Time Goes By and plays Sam. The studio needed to get the movie out into theaters before the conference at Casablanca happened with the Allied leaders. And so we all have two very strange quirks to give us this great musical moment. First, Murray Burnett had to love As Time Goes By from when he was a college student at Cornell. And second, the Allied command had to choose Casablanca as a meeting location at about the same time as Warner Brothers was ready to release the movie. Because of that, everybody comes to Rick's, and we have As Time Goes By as the song to focus our attention on. It is an all-time classic of adventure and romance. But the story of how the movie was made is almost as epic and adventurous. To begin with, the movie was made as the war was in its darkest time for the United States. Everywhere you looked in the news in 1942, when the movie was being prepared for production and being shot, the Allies and the Americans were suffering defeat after defeat. The Japanese advance in the first 6 months of the Pacific War was absolutely unchecked. The Nazis made tremendous progress in their ongoing struggle to conquer the Soviet Union, and they were the undisputed masters of Europe, engaging in the beginning stages of the final solution, the absolute genocide of Jews in Europe. Now, for the folks making the movie, preparing this script for the screen took on a sense of real urgency. Many of the refugees who had escaped to the United States found homes in Hollywood. And as a result, when they cast the extras for Rick's Cafe Americain, it was populated largely by folks who had fled Europe to be safe from Nazism. So, in one of the most powerful scenes of the movie, when the Marseillaise is played, what you see is the reactions, the emotional connection of actual refugees from Europe, hoping and praying that victory will come against Nazism at a time when that victory was by no means certain. Now, it's also true that this movie was made with real drama going on behind the scenes. Ingrid Bergman, who delivered what I believe to be her best performance in this movie, was eager to be done with this movie because she didn't think it would be particularly exceptional. She didn't have any real interest in Casablanca, and honestly, her greatest connection was with Humphrey Bogart, where the two of them would joke about the movie they were making. Ingrid was eager to get on to making The Bells of St. Mary's. Now, Victor Heinried, the man who would play Paul Heinried, the man who would play Victor Laszlo, Ingrid Bergman's husband, he thought he should have been cast as Rick. He was not content playing second fiddle to Humphrey Bogart, who he considered to be a mediocrity. And lastly, Humphrey Bogart himself, well, he knew this movie represented a real chance for him to change his Hollywood persona. He had been cast as a tough guy several times, but he hadn't been cast as a romantic lead. And unfortunately, being cast as the romantic lead in Casablanca led to real-world drama for Humphrey Bogart. He was unhappily married at the time, and his wife, who suffered from severe mental illness, was very jealous and convinced herself that Bogart was having an affair with Ingrid Bergman during the shooting of the film. Now, that wasn't true, but the conflict in their marriage would lead Humphrey Bogart to become emotionally available, and shortly after making Casablanca would cause him to begin an affair with the woman who would end up being his wife, Lauren Bacall. So you see, Casablanca set in motion a number of things that would make Humphrey Bogart into a romantic leading man for the rest of the 40s and 50s, and would shove Paul Heinried into a supporting cast role after an earlier career in the 30s and 40s as a leading man, and would move Ingrid Bergman into a series of roles where she would play again and again an emotionally empathic woman who struggles with articulating herself, despite her own very outspoken nature and her goal that the Bells of St. Mary's would be her star turn. Additionally, one of the great songs, in fact, the best song of the year when the year Casablanca came out, was As Time Goes By. But As Time Goes By almost missed the cut because the composer for the movie wanted to have a composition of his own making. But unfortunately, the movie needed to be released in time to capitalize on the Casablanca Three Powers Conference during the war, and so it was released with As Time Goes By rather than the song that had been originally composed by the composer for the movie. So you see, so many of the details that we cling to in Casablanca, the romantic tension between Bogey and Bergman, the absolutely amazing turn as Victor Laszlo by Paul Heinried, and the song As Time Goes By, every one of those ended up being either a bit of movie magic or a true bit of actual good luck in making the movie. A couple other small notes. First, Humphrey Bogart was an avid chess player. He would regularly play chess by mail with his friends back in New York City. And the chess game that he plays over the course of the movie Casablanca, most notably seen in his scenes where he's talking to Ugarte, those pieces were an actual play-by-mail chess game that he played with a friend of his. By the way, it turns out Bogart won that play-by-mail chess game. Additionally, most of the history of Casablanca has involved one particularly interesting apocryphal story that I think ended up being true. Humphrey Bogart was very good friends with Jack Benny. Jack Benny was very popular on the radio show. The Jack Benny Show was the #1 radio show of the era. And Jack Benny notably performed a spoof, a riff on Casablanca for his radio show. And when you think the phrase, "play it again, Sam," is in the movie, you're wrong, but the reason you're wrong is that it's in the radio drama performed by Jack Benny. So you see, "Play it again, Sam" was a line that burned itself into the American consciousness because the radio program of Jack Benny was listened to by all sorts of Americans, including many who had not yet seen the movie in theaters, because at that time, Americans weren't able to get out as often as they do now. But here's the really fun part. Jack Benny, Humphrey Bogart's friend, was able to crash the set of Casablanca, and he actually appears in the movie in 2 different costumes in uncredited roles. First, he's one of the French policemen during the La Marseillaise scene, and second, he's one of the gamblers in the casino scene where Humphrey Bogart bends the rules of probability to help make sure that Louis's romance is frustrated and the refugee is able to win the money to go home, to escape to America instead of going back to Bulgaria. Jack Benny is in both of those. Jack Benny did the radio drama. Jack Benny was able to get Humphrey Bogart to appear in that radio drama, and as a result, everybody thinks "Play it again, Sam" is a line that's in the movie.
Remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when 2 lovers woo, they still say "I love you," on that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by.
Talk a little bit about the history and how it lines up with the movie. Now, the movie, as everybody knows, is set in December of 1941, the first week of America's involvement in the war. as you know, on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked United States forces in Hawaii and the Philippines. But at the same time, in December of 1941, the island of Malta in the Mediterranean was being besieged by Germans. And on December 2nd, 1941, German forces would get as close as they ever would come to Moscow. So when the movie is set, it is truly a dark time for the Allied cause in World War II. Everywhere they turn, the fascists, the totalitarian dictators are on the march and they are advancing. Everywhere up until that point, all the Allies had known was defeat. Most of China's largest cities had been overrun by the Japanese. All of Western Europe had been overrun by Germany. And a good chunk of the Soviet Union had already been consumed by the Nazi war machine. Britain had barely hung on against an air invasion from Germany, and Malta and Egypt were definitely threatened. But at the time the movie was set, many Americans were convinced, as Rick was, that the affairs of the world are none of their business. Isolationism was the dominant sentiment in the United States. That all changed when Japan attacked the United States, and then when Hitler declared war on the United States, saving President Roosevelt the very difficult task of convincing Americans that they needed to get involved in a second war in Europe. Now, by the time we get to the wide release of the movie, January of 1943, the situation has changed dramatically. By January of 1943, the Americans and the Allies have advanced across North Africa. In fact, on January 14th, 1943, the Allied powers were going to have their conference in Casablanca, which was part of why the proposed name Casablanca stuck and why Warner Brothers was so determined to have that movie released in early January. That way, while the newsreels were talking about Roosevelt and Churchill meeting in Casablanca, the movie theaters would also be showing a movie called Casablanca with World War II as its core moral dilemma. Now, by that time, by the end of January 1943, the Japanese were evacuating Guadalcanal, the very first true retreat of the Japanese. We'd already won the Battle of Midway earlier in the summer of 1942, but by January of 1943, we finally see a break in the unending stream of advance by the Japanese. So, when the Oscars came around in 1943, how did Casablanca do? Well, as most people know, it won Best Picture. It also won Best Director and Best Screenplay. In doing so, Casablanca achieved a remarkable feat for an unproduced play. It was recognized as the best film produced in 1943, even though it had been chosen in 1941 and was mostly shot and completed over 1942. Now, when you watch it in 2021, what do you think? Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think that the movie is a remarkable piece of moral play. Obviously, the Nazis are evil. Obviously, the Nazis are bad. But in the figure of Rick, Victor, and Louis, we have three men who are able to crystallize the varying responses to evil in the world. And we're able to see three characters express the Greek concepts of love in their three forms. And for me, that makes Casablanca especially resonant. You see, sometimes when I watch Casablanca, I think of it as a historian. How would I have responded to Nazism if I had lived at that time? Would I have done what Victor did and said, no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is, we must fight it in every way possible? Would I have responded the way Rick did, trying to do my best, intervening in the Spanish Civil War, fighting on the side of the anti-fascists? But if things went badly wrong for me, like they did for Rick, where the love of his life abandons him at the train station while he's hoping to escape the advancing Nazi war machine in Paris, would I just crawl into my own grief and depression and say that the affairs of the world are not in your department? I might. Would I do what Louis did, which is, while being patriotic, recognizing that ultimately one man may not be able to make a difference, and so instead the best you can do is look out for yourself? I'd like to think I wouldn't do that. I'd like to think that I would be a Victor Laszlo, but I think in truth I would probably have done similar to what Rick did. And the best part about the movie is that by putting us in the position of Rick, by letting us see Rick's emotional and moral dilemma come full circle, by giving us the love story with Ilsa and the issue of expanding Nazism coming together in one place at Casablanca, we're able to put ourselves in the position of being that reluctant American, and we're able to fantasize about stepping forward and saying, I'm going to do the right thing even if it hurts me. And so by the end of the movie, we are able to envision ourselves like Richard Blaine going forward with Louis in the beginning of a beautiful friendship and looking for some way to fight back, while knowing that we have kept the morally righteous Victor Laszlo on his path to continuing to battle for freedom. You see, in this way, the main plot of Casablanca, the main message of standing up against Nazism however you can, is affirmed by every aspect of the storytelling in the movie. Every character in the movie, from Carl the bartender to Rick, ends up saying, I'm going to stand up to Nazism. And so the story of Rick, Ilsa, Victor, Louis, Carl, Sasha, Yvonne, and Sam all continues on into the mists of our imagination. Casablanca may end, but Kilroy has only just begun. We've now completed episode 1, and it's time for you to share your thoughts below. It's also a great idea to like, share, and subscribe, because when you do those things, you can help me make sure we're covering movies that you want to have talked about. These stories are too important to be forgotten, and this era is too significant to be ignored. Kilroy Was Here is a product of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, Matt Broman, President. This project, and every other project of the Evocati Legal Services Foundation, is done to bring awareness and support to veterans and active duty service members. If you want to be a part of our project, please join us over at www.evocati.org.in. We are committed to serving those who have served us all.